Well, hello there. Welcome back. We are discussing the Derek Chauvin conviction and the motion filed by his attorneys to get him a new trial. So, if you have or have not been following the trial, here is the quick gist of it. Derek Chauvin was actually tried for the death of George Floyd. He did not plead guilty, nothing of that nature. He had an actual trial, right? He was then found guilty by a jury of his peers, right? And now his criminal defense attorneys have filed a motion saying that he should receive a new trial because the trial that he had was unfair and biased, right? So they're arguing for what some might refer to as a mistrial or what some colloquially refer to as a new trial for the fact that he was not given a fair trial in the beginning. So let's start with the right to a fair trial. For those of you who may not be aware, in the United States of America, you have the right to a quote unquote fair and quote unquote public trial. So what does that mean? Well, what it means is that you have the right to an unbiased proceeding. It means you have the right to a proceeding in which when you walk into that courtroom, what happens to you is based upon the evidence presented and not based upon the color of your skin, not based upon what you were accused of doing, not based upon where you are, not based upon your religion, not based upon your employment. You get where I'm going with this? That is your right to a fair trial. It's your right to enter the courtroom, defend yourself, and have the other side, the prosecution, actually prove that you have done whatever it is they are accusing you of doing. That's your right to a fair trial. So with all those things considered, right, the question, of course, is what would be the substance of Derek Chauvin's defense attorneys arguing that he did not receive a fair trial? Well, before we get into some of the statements made by his defense attorneys, we will first just talk about things that could have been observed from the outside looking in, which could have hinted that this motion was coming. Because to be honest, people, the minute that he was found guilty, I knew this motion was coming. And I knew it was coming because of all the things that had occurred during this trial. I knew that there was so much material there for an argument that he had an unfair trial. So here's the biggest one. Representative Maxine Waters was heavily involved in this trial, as were many politicians who normally don't comment on these things at all. Interesting. She was heavily involved in this trial, and she decided to make some statements about Derek Chauvin and about the outcome of the trial. She pretty much said that the outcome of the trial should be a guilty verdict. And she insinuated that if that were not the verdict, people would have the right to react in physical manner, whether that be taking to the streets or whether it was interpreted as violence. It could be interpreted in many different ways, right? That statement by someone like Maxine Waters, in my opinion, is enough to warrant the motion on its own, right? So we are going to get into, what else could have gone into that. But that statement in itself was enough to warrant an attorney, a good attorney, arguing that their client did not receive a fair trial. Now, why is that? Let's break it down, shall we? So Representative Maxine Waters has been in Congress for, my goodness, I think well over 40 years. She has a massive, massive amount of influence over her constituency, over the United States of America at large, over the Black community, over the female community, right? And several other sectors they're in and they're out. So first of all, she is a public figure stating that a trial of someone who has not yet been convicted should render a certain verdict. That's the first thing. The second thing is she said these things not in the comfort of her home. She said these things not, sipping tea with one of her best friends in their backyard. She said these things not, having a quick chat with one of her friends over the phone. She said these things publicly and was recorded publicly making these statements. That's the second thing. And now the third thing about this statement, which should have been the most obvious, is that she insinuates and kind of sort of demands, right, if you've seen the statement, that the verdict come out a certain way. She insinuated a sort of demand for a guilty verdict. So when you put together these three things, you put together one, a public figure who has heavy influence. Two, a statement being made in public. And three, the statement demanding a certain verdict. You have in and of itself the cause for a criminal defense attorney, anyone, up to snuff, to say, hey, my client didn't get a fair trial. I had this woman with all this influence pretty much telling the jury that he had to be found guilty. So, as you can see, Representative Waters in herself, in my opinion, was enough for the motion for a new trial, right? But of course, I'm sure there are other statements and other allegations therein. So where does this right come from? Well, in the 6th Amendment to our United States Constitution, it says, I'm reading it verbatim here, in all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury of the state and district wherein the crime shall have been committed. So, that is where the right to a fair trial stems from. It stems from your constitutional right to have a trial, as I said, in which you walk in innocent, and then the evidence thereby proves whether you are or are not guilty of what you are being accused of. Your right to a fair trial stems directly from your constitutional rights. Former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin filed a motion for a new trial Tuesday after he was convicted last month of murdering George Floyd. Chauvin's attorney, Eric Nelson, is alleging pretrial publicity affected Chauvin's right to a fair trial. The motion alleges the court abused its discretion by denying the request for a change in venue and a new trial. Because the court failed to sequester the jurors or admonish them to avoid all media, Nelson's filing said, they were subjected not only to prejudicial publicity, but also to jury intimidation or potential fear of retribution. The court has already rejected many of these arguments, and the state will vigorously oppose them, says John Stiles, Deputy Chief of Staff for Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison. In total, the motion alleges 8 abuses of discretion by the court. So, as we said, there would have to be more, right? But I'm sure that the conversation about Maxine Waters is going to be in the background as part of the prejudicial publicity that jurors were not warned or admonished to stay away from, and also that could have tainted jurors and in the end affected Derek Chauvin's right to a fair trial, right? And think about the language that's being used. So when Chauvin's attorney says jury intimidation or potential fear of retribution, again, go back to the Maxine Waters statement. Remember that she was encouraging people to take some sort of action if a guilty verdict was not rendered. That sounds like jury intimidation or potential fear of some type of retribution for a certain verdict, right? So I am sure that we will continue to hear more and more about this as the motion for a new trial has already been filed, and the state will file a responsive pleading to that motion, right? So we'll hear about that as well. And more and more will unfold. And as more unfolds, we may talk about this again. But I thought this was a great opportunity to discuss the right to a fair trial, media in your trial. And the fact that if for some reason you have undergone a criminal prosecution and the media or a public figure or someone who could reach the public insinuates that your trial should have a certain verdict as the outcome, you know that you have the argument to be made that you did not receive a fair trial. So what say you? Do you think Derek Chauvin will get a new trial? Comment below, and we'll see you next time on Empowered Esquire TV.